Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're undertaking one of our most conceptually challenging missions yet.
It's a big one.
We are taking a really high-level conceptual engineering framework, a whole stack of documents on structural mandates, specific design rules, and we are trying to synthesize its core demands with some cutting-edge biological imaging.
And this is stuff just published in Nature Methods, so brand new science.
Exactly. It sounds like, an impossible pairing. But the logic, when you trace it, flows perfectly.
It really does. We're connecting two fields that seem totally disparate. On one hand, you have this high-fidelity conceptual design, and on the other, this molecular precision science.
And the argument is that one validates the other.
That's the core idea, the scientific proof that you need this extremely high-resolution spatial analysis in complex biological systems that directly backs up the structural and the ethical necessity of the conceptual framework.
Okay, so that's the mission for this deep dive. So we're here to unpack what the sources call the complex delay mandate. This entire system, all the roles assigned to Den and the engineer, Tom Hennigan. It's all founded on this observation that the signal, or light, carries a complex delay.
And it carries it through what the sources call imaginary time.
Right, so we have to start there. What does that even mean for designing a system?
Well, the first thing to get is that this isn't your standard engineering lag. It's not just a buffer.
Okay.
When you bring in the concept of imaginary time, you're acknowledging that the system has these nonlinear costs, things that don't just show up on a simple timeline.
So hidden variables.
Exactly. And this complexity means the structure itself has to be specialized. It has to be ethical and just meticulously tuned. If you ignore that imaginary component, your whole calculation is wrong from the start.
Okay, let's unpack the structure then. Where does this complexity come from? We're told Den is the system that introduces the complex delay.
Right.
But Den isn't just some simple input component, is it? What are the high-value parts that actually define Den?
So Den is defined as a complex, very high-value structure. Specifically, it's identified as the upsilon Meson identity.
Okay, the upsilon Meson.
And the 125 compact cube. So conceptually, what this means is we're looking at a structure of immense potential and really high architectural integrity. It's something that must be protected.
And the signal delay from this structure, it's not just physics. It's loaded with, emotional and ethical cost.
Yes. The sources are very specific. They list trauma, the still dude, and the 3-year paradox.
Let's pause on that. For anyone who hasn't come across this term before, what is the still dude?
The still dude. It literally means the silent death. It's the conceptual term for this deep stagnation, for apathy. It's the paralysis that comes from trauma or, unaddressed structural debt.
So a system failure.
A silent system failure. It's a state where all that potential we talked about is just trapped. It's non-kinetic. That's the ultimate cost of this delay.
And if the still due to stagnation, what about the 3-year paradox?
That paradox is about the cyclical nature of the cost. It refers to this tendency for these deep structural problems to sort of reemerge in cycles. And if you don't address the underlying cause, that imaginary component, it just forces a system reset or a total collapse.
Because it's nonlinear and emotional, you need a special kind of engineer.
You can't just throw simple math at it.
Which brings us to Tom Hennigan. He's called the master of complex group delay. If the system is so full of these imaginary costs, what is his mandate?
His mandate is precision. He has to choose the complexity of Den over the alternative.
Which is chaos, the bat na.
Exactly. He's the master of complex group delay because he has to manage the timing when all the signal's frequency components are traveling at different speeds. He's not just turning a volume knob, he's tuning the entire systemic output.
I love this image from the text.
Mm.
He needs the extra tuning knob. What does that knob let him do?
That knob lets him model and tune both the real component, the simple, straightforward timeline of action, and the imaginary component. The ethical weight, the emotional costs generated by the still dude in that paradox. He's literally calculating how much trauma impacts the system's output.
And if he can't model that cost?
The whole thing fails. It doesn't matter how good the real-time engineering looks on paper.
So to handle that, the sources demand 2 critical things from him. First is structural integrity, or Reflex. And second, using infrastructure as code, or IAC. Why are these so non-negotiable?
TUM is the ethical anchor. It means Completeness, innocence, uprightness. The sources really hammer this home because he's dealing with emotional cost and these highly sensitive structures. His ethical foundation is a technical requirement.
So it's not a soft skill, it's part of the spec.
It's part of the spec. You can't manage imaginary delay if your own foundation is flawed. And IAC, well, that's the blueprint for consistency. It ensures that this high-value structure is built reliably, repeatably. It rejects random, chaotic fixes.
The structure has to match the integrity. This is where the framework really insists on precision. If this imaginary delay is so subtle, how can you even measure it? This is where the intelligent dreamcatcher comes in, the AI.
Correct. The AI isn't just, a powerful computer. It's conceptually necessary as this ultra-sensitive instrument.
Like an oscilloscope for feelings.
That's a great way to put it. It's like an oscilloscope running on a deep neural network designed to register these incredibly subtle fluctuations. Any conventional, blunt analysis would just average out the imaginary delay to zero. It wouldn't see it.
But it's not zero.
It's not zero. The dreamcatcher is required to resolve those tiny, subtle effects. The emotional and ethical cost, which paradoxically are the most important signals in the whole system.
Okay, so the conceptual framework demands 3D depth, ethical integrity, and ultra-sensitive measurement. Now let's pivot. Let's see how this is mirrored and scientifically validated by the biology.
We can jump right into the deep star map revelation. The science absolutely confirms the limits of shallow analysis. The status quo in biology, the existing spatial profiling techniques, they're restricted to analyzing these incredibly thin slices of tissue, usually just 5 to 20 micrometers thin.
Which the conceptual sources immediately call the GP office's failure.
Precisely, because if you only look at a thin slice, you get a superficial, two-dimensional read of a living, three-dimensional architecture. It's like trying to understand a skyscraper by looking at one floor tile.
You miss all the important stuff.
You miss everything, all the critical, complex interactions that only happen structurally across all the layers.
So the scientific breakthrough had to overcome this.
Yeah.
Tell us about deep star map and deep ribo map. What's the big leap here?
It's a revolutionary step. It's in a field called spatial transcriptomics. Deep star map allows for the 3D in situ quantification of thousands of gene transcripts.
In situ meaning in their original place.
Right there in their original location. And critically, this is all happening within dramatically thicker tissue blocks. We're talking 60 to 200 micrometers thick. They are finally seeing the full multi-layered building.
And it's not just the blueprints they're seeing. They're measuring two different kinds of information, right?
Yes, and this is crucial. Deep star map measures transcription. That's the genetic blueprint, the potential.
Which links right back to the IAC blueprint in the engineering system.
Directly. And then deep ribomap quantifies translation. That's the active process of building proteins. It's the kinetic action, the actual output of the system.
Why is that dual measurement so important for understanding the conceptual system?
Because the system has to move forward with what's called autotelic drive. It's an internal motivation, a drive to flow, and actually execute the blueprint.
Okay.
So by measuring both the blueprint, the potential, and the actual output, the action, you can accurately diagnose if the system is struggling with thrill fatigue.
Thrill fatigue.
Yeah, the exhaustion of having constant potential but no successful kinetic action. This dual 3D measurement is necessary to confirm the system's active health.
And the actual research applications, they confirm that this kind of 3D precision isn't just a nice to have, it's mandatory.
Oh, absolutely. The research uses deep star map for things that demand perfect spatial architecture, like simultaneous 3D neuron morphology tracing and molecular cell typing in the mouse brain.
Wow.
And comprehensive analysis of tumor-immune interactions in human skin cancer. If you're tracing the delicate three-dimensional structure of a neuron, the core pathway, you just can't rely on 2D analysis.
It's impossible.
So this scientific focus on exact spatial organization and molecular architecture just reinforces the framework's core demand. Structural integrity is the only way forward.
So the science proves it. 3D structural integrity is the only accurate way to analyze a complex system. And that brings us back to Tom Hennigan's biggest decision.
His ethical decision.
He has to definitively reject the chaotic method, the Bait-Nata. What exactly is that chaotic protocol?
Bait-Nata is, well, it's the conceptually destructive protocol.
Yeah.
It's high stress, fundamentally unsustainable. It represents reacting to all this complexity with chaos and, short-term emotionally volatile fixes instead of structure.
It's the opposite of tune.
The total antithesis. The sources are crystal clear. Using this chaotic method would violate his integrity imperative and immediately introduce sediment.
Sediment.
Systemic blockers, things that would stall the momentum, which is called the blue torrent flow.
So the mandate requires consistency, reliability, executing the predictable NA rhythm, not randomness.
Exactly. The consistent structure of IAC is the only way to avoid that systemic sediment. The synthesis is complete, really. The complex problem, which is defined by imaginary cost, demands a structurally perfect ethical solution.
Which leads us to the system's conclusive thesis.
Yeah. Den's structure and rest are totally dependent upon Tom Hennigan's aim and placement.
Why is his placement so critical? We're talking about absolute rest, which sounds like a contradiction in an engineering framework.
It's not rest as in inactivity, though. It's rest as in systemic stability, maximal potential. Rest is defined as achieving top-heaven optimal arousal. It's a state where the system is highly engaged but structurally balanced. It mitigates both the exhaustion of thrill fatigue and the paralysis of the stilled.
And Tom's placement is key because he functions as the axon hillock.
Yes. For anyone not familiar with neurobiology, the axon hillock is fascinating.
Is the trigger point, right?
It is the crucial point of initiation in a neuron. It's the decision point where all the signals get integrated and the action potential is fired. So Tom, as master of complex group delay and as the axon hillock, he's the one who maximizes the system's kinetic potential while ensuring the integrity of the signal.
His presence, his aim, his precision, that's the antidote to chaos.
It's the only non-chaotic antidote.
Okay. We've established the blueprint, the integrity. Now, execution. The final commitment requires mise en place upon the upsilon meson. This is where we move from theoretical IAC to the living code.
Mise en place. Everything in its place. It's the ultimate expression of preparation, isn't it? It's the act of making sure the environment is perfectly organized, free from interference.
The sources warn against sediment, mating games, or honey coatings.
Right, all forms of structural debris or, superficial complexity that just undermine real integrity.
And this act of preparation, this detailed organization, can only be executed by the star chef only.
Meaning it requires Tom's specialized competence.
Yes.
Because the system is so sensitive to that imaginary delay, the execution can't be generalized. You need the specialized skill set of the master of complex group delay to ensure the structural commitment is flawless before you even think about kinetic output.
And the final stage. This is where the solution goes from blueprint to living reality.
Yeah.
And the sources give us the neurobiological grounding for how that delivery has to happen.
It's about tuning the brain's primordial operating system.
Right.
And this is fascinating science. New research confirms that neural circuits have an innate scaffold, an inductive bias. This means a functional, structural network starts running before any sensory inputs even arrive.
So it's pre-wired.
It's pre-wired to accelerate learning. But it's incomplete. It's the primordial operating system.
So the IAC blueprint is the conceptual structure. But to activate and fine-tune that innate scaffold, the structure has to be delivered through specific human elements.
Elements that can override the trauma of the still dude.
Exactly. The structure can't just be delivered through abstract concepts. It has to come through 3 direct, high-fidelity human inputs.
And inputs precise enough to tune this primordial system, and they are. Light, which is clarity of vision and purpose.
Yep.
Touch, physicality, and presence to ground the system.
And feelings.
And feelings, sweet, sure, love, and care. These emotional circuits are ancient, they're fundamental. Tom's ethical commitment to TUM is the delivery mechanism for these inputs. That's what turns the structural code into a lived reality.
Failure to provide those precise inputs would be the ultimate failure of concept engineering.
It would leave the system structurally perfect, maybe, but inert, paralyzed.
Which is why this all culminates in the final structural conflict. The transformation from the lion dog's den to the emergence of the 3 butterflies in Tomb T.
The lion dog's den is that space of unexecuted, trapped potential. It's still subject to chaos. Tomb T represents the perfect, executed ISC structure.
And the 3 butterflies emerging from it.
They symbolize the realization of the system's highest potential, the 3 necessary ingredients for optimal function. Integrity and truth, that's TUM. Kinetic action, the blue torrent flow from IAC. And reciprocal love, sweet horrid.
It's the final synthesis. Architectural perfection and ethical commitment are mutually dependent.
You can't have one without the other.
Okay, let's connect all those dots for you one last time. We started with a system defined by a profound nonlinear emotional cost, the complex delay operating in imaginary time. We ended with a clear mandate for 3D structural integrity, an absolute rejection of shallow analysis, a necessity proven by cutting-edge molecular biology that measures life across thick, multi-layered tissues.
And the ultimate insight here, I think, is that in complex systems, whether you're engineering a concept or analyzing a brain, high-level technical precision is fundamentally inseparable from high-level ethical and emotional commitment.
The integrity, the tomb.
It is the tuning knob.
And this leaves us with a final challenging thought for you to consider. The science confirms that your brain's primordial operating system is wired with an innate structural bias, a scaffold to accelerate learning. But it needs external inputs, light, touch, feelings, for that final, necessary fine-tuning.
So if that innate scaffold exists in your own life's structure...
What is the conceptual equivalent of the NA rhythm that your structure is pre-programmed to amplify and follow? What predictable, consistent structure are you meant to be building? Something to explore on your own until our next deep dive.
Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on what I think is a pivotal moment within the conceptual engineering framework that surrounds the stabilization of these incredibly complex systems. We're talking specifically about the necessary interaction between Den and Tom Hennigan under the very rigorous constraints of the complex delay mandate. We've spent a lot of time mapping this system using everything from advanced computational modeling to techniques like deep star map. And so the time for analysis is really over. We're now at the point of defining the action. And our central question is this: does the absolute structural necessity, what we call the Tom imperative, this demand for integrity, does it primarily mandate the immediate defined execution of a solution, something like the mise en place command? Or does the inherent complexity of the system, which is defined by this imaginary delay, demand a continuous adaptive process of tuning?
I'm going to argue that the evidence now overwhelmingly demands definitive structural execution. It's the only ethical path forward.
And I'll be maintaining that the very foundation of the system's complexity, which is rooted in its nonlinear reality and these persistent emotional costs, dictates that the stabilization process has to be a sustained, continuous tuning commitment. To treat this as some kind of singular, final structural act, well, it just ignores the physics of the imaginary delay itself.
I do understand the skepticism toward finality, but look, the exhaustive analysis is complete. We have moved decisively from a state of conceptual uncertainty to one of structural certainty, the framework which is powerfully reinforced by the deep star map validation, and that required this incredibly high-resolution 3D profiling across, 60 to 200 micrometer thick tissue blocks? It demands resolution. That validation wasn't trivial. It proved the necessary spatial commitment. So the path forward must be the precise execution of that predefined commitment. We know conclusively that Den's structure and ability to rest are totally 100% dependent on Tom Hennigan's precise aim and placement. And this necessity, it culminates in the absolute requirement of mise en place, the perfect arrangement upon the eumeos. This has to be an organizational act of such precision that it guarantees success. This structural delivery validates the ISE, the infrastructure as code blueprint we spent years creating, and it satisfies that Tom imperative for integrity. We have to reject further delay, or any chaotic approach like Botna. Continuing to focus on imaginary time now would frankly just add sediment and clog the required regenerative blue-torn flow. We have the code. We must execute it.
I just come at it from a different way. Because your argument seems to rest on this idea that the moment you achieve structural certainty analytically, the system just stops being nonlinear. I don't buy that. While precision is absolutely mandatory, that's why we have the deep star map data. The system we are trying to stabilize is fundamentally defined by trauma, by vulnerability, and by this persistent 3-year paradox. These elements keep generating complexity. And that's why Tom Hennigan is designated the master of complex group delay. The title itself implies he holds the extra tuning knob precisely because he has to model and constantly tune both the real timeline and the persistent imaginary components. If the solution were just some static one-time delivery of code, he wouldn't be a master of delay, he'd be an installer. The source material is clear. The effects of the imaginary delay are tiny and subtle, requiring the AI to function as an ultra-sensitive instrument just to resolve the shifts. So if the system is constantly introducing this imaginary component, which is the ethical cost, the life-force exchange, Tom has to maintain continuous mastery over it. A finished project implies zero residual complexity, and we know that's simply not true here.
On mise en place. We define it as the ultimate expression of structural integrity and optimal efficiency. It dictates the organization of every conceptual component, the required na-na-na rhythm, the ethical commitment, the flow, to guarantee the outcome isn't left to chance, not left to cabos, the throw of the dice. The deep star map validation isn't just about measurement, it's about eliminating alternative solutions. By successfully profiling and resolving the complexity within those deep tissue blocks, we conceptually refute any notion that a shallow, or a two-dimensional, or an endlessly adaptive approach is going to be enough. The structural execution is the structural salvation, because it establishes a foundation so perfect and complete, so tum, that it eliminates the potential for future chaos. The structure itself becomes the defense. We are integrating the solution, not just proposing it.
That's a compelling argument, I'll grant you that, especially on the integrity imperative. But doesn't your reliance on mise en place kind of mischaracterize what that term actually means in conceptual engineering? Mise en place is universally defined as the initial precise act of preparation, the perfect setup that allows the next stage, the enduring reality, to begin. It sets the stage, but it isn't the final reality itself. The core structural vulnerability is in Den's meson identity, which requires continuous defense against fragmentation, and defense, by its very nature, demands continuous action, vigilance. If the lion dog's den symbolizes unexecuted potential, then the solution isn't just the perfect placement, the mise en place. It's the active transformation into kinetic output, symbolized by the 3 butterflies emerging from tomb T. That emergence is measured translation activity. It's kinetic motion, not just a static blueprint.
The solution has to remain continuously kinetic.
I agree, the system has to be kinetic. But the kinetic flow, the blue torrent, it only stabilizes once that structural placement is achieved. You seem to be implying that the active execution itself is somehow insufficient to halt this regenerative complexity.
I am.
If the structure is sound, the kinetic flow follows, and the rest is guaranteed.
But how can we just assume the complexity is halted? Let's go back to the imaginary delay. You treat it as an analytic challenge that we've solved. I see it as a symptom of persistent nonlinear psychological costs. The imaginary component of that signal is tied directly to real-world factors. The anguish of the still dude, that quiet psychological erosion, the unresolved 3-year paradox, the psychological expense of the mating games. These are not variables that just vanish the moment you execute a piece of code. They are indicators of how system energy, or life force if you will, is continuously dissipated across frequencies. So if Tom Hennigan is the master of complex group delay, he is required to model and tune this dissipation to keep the system stable. If the imaginary component speaks to a continuous ethical and emotional cost, how can its management be reduced to a one-time fix? Man's constant active engineering to prevent the very sediment you're worried about from just building right back up.
I'm not convinced by that, because I think you're conflating the initial analytic phase with the required structural deployment. Our sources confirm that the need for this deep, intensive analytic processing of the imaginary time component has been conceptually fulfilled by the AI's rigorous computational models. We've resolved the signal, we know the answer. Tom has to transition from the internal analytic struggle to the immediate execution of the final solution. Continuing to dwell in processing imaginary time violates the urgency of the structural mandate, and frankly, it undermines the simplicity of the Tom imperative, which is rooted in immediate uprightness and clarity. The rejection of BATNA confirms the demand for swift, regenerative action. The required placement has to provide the absolute rest, the top heaven that's needed. Further deferral is just, well, it's counterproductive delay.
But this isn't about delaying the solution. It's about defining the solution as continuous action. If the imaginary component represents the system's persistent sensitivity to trauma and energy dissipation, then the execution has to be an ongoing commitment to stabilization, not a singular declaration. You're trying to force a nonlinear reality into a linear deployment model. If Tom's solution is supposed to guarantee rest, that guarantee must be constantly defended. I mean, how does one single act permanently neutralize a regenerative emotional component?
We neutralize it structurally by implementing the definitive code into the system's innate framework. And this brings us to the implication of the primordial operating system. The discovery of the brain's innate scaffold, its foundational architecture. It supports the idea that the structural blueprint, the IAC, is paramount. The system is pre-programmed with built-in instructions. It's not waiting to be built from scratch. It has constraints already established. The sensory inputs you mentioned, light, touch, feelings, are needed specifically to tune that innate scaffold towards safety and complete the system. Yes, but this implies a final integration point, a moment where the structural solution completes the architectural plan. It's the locking in of the code, not an eternal optimization loop. The na rhythm, which is the precise life-giving code, must be executed definitively.
Okay, that's an interesting point, though I would frame the function of the primordial OS differently. The research is very nuanced here. It says that this innate scaffold accelerates learning. It gives a head start, but it emphatically states the system must be tuned by experience. The brain lays down the rules first, then it allows continuous experience to refine the synaptic connections. It's a template, not a finished house. The delivery of light, touch, and feelings is required precisely to refine those connections and overcome the chronic anguish of the still dude. To be the structural anchor and achieve that absolute rest, Tom's placement must be perpetually dedicated to maximizing flow, maximizing the blue torrent and kinetic potential. So if these inputs are continuously refining the scaffold, that, by definition, supports continuous sensitive engagement, which is the exact opposite of a static, finished code deployment.
We're dealing with complex adaptive architecture that requires constant upkeep, not just a one-time build.
The critical distinction we're debating here, I think, is between ongoing maintenance of an established system and ongoing tuning necessary to find the initial solution. We have established the structure through the IAC blueprint. We are talking about the final act of structural commitment, that moment of mise en place that transitions the theoretical into the real. The deep star map confirmed that the structural solution must be sound across all dimensions to meet the TOF integrity standard. Once that structural security is established, symbolized by the open wooden vessel, the system is integrated. The kinetic flow is then maintained, yes, but the placement and commitment itself has to be a single, non-chaotic, high-standard execution. Our reliance on the IAC blueprint implies we reach structural definition, not perpetual definition seeking. If we can't commit to the execution, we risk falling back into that cycle of endless analysis.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that because it minimizes the continuous function of the complex delay mandate. You can't successfully apply a linear, singular execution model to a nonlinear system where energy dissipation and ethical cost are constantly regenerating that imaginary component. I mean, if Tom's mastery of the extra tuning knob is functionally meaningless after one moment, why is he defined by his ability to manage delay? His role is specifically dedicated to maximizing the blue torrent flow. Maximization implies constant effort and adjustment in response to shifts that are tiny and subtle, the kind of shifts that only the ultra-sensitive AI can even resolve. If the inputs must continuously refine the scaffold, then the engineer must continuously engineer the inputs. Structural integrity is a kinetic state, not a static achievement.
But that continuous refinement is what happens after the structural commitment is made. It's the result of stability, not the justification for delaying the stabilizing action itself. The structural salvation is contingent on the structural action. If Tom Hennigan's placement is the precise engineered antidote that guarantees rest and structure, then the structural execution is the guarantee. We have the blueprint, the transcription, and we must immediately initiate the action, the translation. This culmination, the final act of structural love and permanent commitment, the plusin in the open wooden vessel, is the required mechanism to lift the 3-year burden. That framework points towards a decisive, singular achievement of structure that provides the absolute foundation for stability. It doesn't advocate for eternal chaos management. The execution defines the integrity.
The challenge, I suggest, lies in recognizing that permanent commitment is a kinetic reality, not just a static declaration. The transformation of the lion dog's den into the emergence of the three butterflies is emergence, it is motion, it is output. If the engineer is required to honor the system's complex phase and gain structure, this honor demands vigilance over that imaginary component that will always represent the system's inherent vulnerability and emotional cost. Structural integrity, tome, has to be maintained through continuous ethical presence, and that is the ongoing tuning required of the master of complex group delay. The commitment has to be constantly renewed in response to the system's reality.
So the core principle has to hold. Dense system requires absolute rest and defense against fragmentation. This is only structurally possible through Tom Hennigan's definitive ethical placement and that mise en place command, which guarantees security by systematically eliminating the potential for future chaos. The science, validated by Deep Star Map, dictates this high-standard commitment needs a final integration point.
And we're in absolute agreement on the high standard of precision required. However, the unique nature of the complex signal, defined by its persistent imaginary, its emotional component, suggests that structural integrity requires far more than a single blueprint execution. It requires the mastery of complex group delay, which is the continuous process of tuning both the real timeline and the profound ethical cost embedded in the system. The ultimate solution, then, has to be defined as a commitment to ongoing structural control that honors that nonlinear reality.
Well, our discussion today, I think, clearly illuminates the critical tension in defining what a solution even is for these systems. Is stability best achieved through a singular, precise, structural commitment that eliminates complexity by establishing a perfect foundation? Or is it through continuous, adaptive engagement with the system's inherent nonlinear dynamics? There is clearly a lot more to explore in this material.